Hello again, and welcome to this episode of In the Trenches. We've lined up a very special guest for you today. He is creative director to country superstar Luke Combs and owner of Black Label Creative. So without any further ado, I present to you, Zack Massey. Anyway, Zack Massey in the house. Thank you for coming, brother.
Dude, thanks for having me. I don't know how I got added to the list on this thing with everybody else you've had.
Shit, man. You were, we got to meet, a couple weeks ago when you on your, you had gotten back from Super Bowl?
Yeah, we had just got back from the Grammys and the Super Bowl.
How was that trip?
It's wild. That was, the Grammys was the first trip I've ever been on that was secret.
Oh.
Air quotes, right? Because we were performing with Tracy Chapman and they had kept that whole thing a secret.
That was the Luke Combs, Tracy Chapman performance was, I think, the show winner, wasn't it?
Pretty crazy. It was wild. Well, so I'll start with that kind of thing because it was weird because they had us. We were up in Hollywood for a few days so that they could privately rehearse. Oh. It's kind of it was a very NDA hang with the people that were, at the studio to make sure no one realized she was in town because, she hadn't performed in years. So they had, a couple days to really kind of get to know each other and the band to rehearse and practice and kind of do the whole thing, which was wild. And then we kind of moved bases from Hollywood into LA. To do the actual rehearsals for the Grammys. And again, it was all very hush hush. And then in the middle of the whole thing, it leaked somehow that we were doing it. And obviously it was one of those things that nobody ever confirmed it. So, but speculation started getting higher and higher. Sure. And you just, there's so many moving parts with that it's it's almost impossible in today's world to keep those things fully secretive. But it was really cool and it was a wild experience. But you're right, it was kind of one of those big moments of the show. And we saw that the next week when we go to the Super Bowl. Yeah. We played a kind of semi-private thing on the night before the Super Bowl. And Super Bowl in Vegas, it's the who's who of everybody who was there. Sure. But I could already see with some of the people that we were around that week, his level of brand awareness just went through the roof. Really? We were, Post Malone came and hung out at the show and it's when's that going to happen? You know what I mean? And so it's then we go to a couple parties and it's the people, everybody's oh, is that Luke? Is that Luke? You know what I mean? It's LA, people that wouldn't necessarily, probably don't pay much attention to country. But they're paying attention. They're paying attention now, and that brand value went way higher, through that performance. And
whose idea was it to perform?
So that whole process was wild. So no one really kind of knew how to get in touch with her, and no one had really heard from her in years. And Luke's publicist kind of knew someone that was loosely connected to her and they felt was in communication with her because, we recorded that song and because it was the first song, his first favorite song. And it was the first song he ever learned on guitar. And so we were in the studio and he's man, I really want to do a cover of this. It would just be fun. Just kind of my thing to throw on the album. It was never intended to be a single or be what it was. So he recorded it and then it just took off. And so once that became a single, once that became the featured thing and blew up within the fan world and all that, well, then they started reaching out. People tried to reach out to her to get a comment on it, and I think finally, maybe a month or two in, she submitted through someone, I think it was a Rolling Stones article or something hey, here's my 2-line thought on it. And then Luke's publicist knew that person that was essentially connected and somehow got a message through him to her that Luke would just love to connect or something. I don't know exactly kind of how that went down, but long story short, when we were in Australia, she just out of the blue, called him they were like, "Hey, Luke, you might need to pay attention to your phone, like between this time and this time." And
Tracy Chapman's going to be buzzing you.
And she called, and so they had a 20-30 minute phone conversation, and it was great. But that kind of like kicked off that kind of, relationship between the two of them. And, I don't really know kind of how it morphed from that to the idea of like doing it on the Grammys. Like we started kind of all communicating, and it came up that, hey, this might be a thing. But for a long time, it was like, it might be a thing, but like, don't get your hopes up because it's probably not a thing that's going to happen. But either way, we're probably still going to perform the song, whether it's like by ourselves or it's with us. Like we got the slot, right? Like we knew we were going to be on the Grammys, but it's like, can we turn this into like something else even cooler? And so that's, then it happened, and
it happened pretty organically, actually.
Yeah. And it was great. I mean, he really let that be like her moment too. You know what I mean? Like you could see just, he was having so much fun up there and just smiling the whole time. And it was cool. I think it was cooler for him than people realize, right? Like he really, it was an honor for him to like kind of take that and have that kind of serendipitous moment of first favorite song, Grammy performance with her. And it was really cool.
So let's jump back to how it all began with, I guess I love your story. Is like, how did you come in contact with Luke? Like
so it's wild.
Because a lot of people would want to be like, trying to get to that photographers and content creators to get to that top tier.
So I mean the story's so long, and I'll try to give you like the condensed version, but long story short, Luke and I are from the same hometown. So we're both from Asheville, North Carolina. But so back when I was a kid, like I was way into like, not really, like I had a camera, like my first camera was like the Sony that you put the floppy disk in the side of. Like we had film cameras when I was a kid, like K1000, Pentax, and like the AE1 Canon, the typical like 35 millimeter family take the photo at Disney type thing.
Cameras,
But my first like digital camera I remember was like the Sony that you like put the floppy disk in the side of it. It's like the 3.5-inch disc like in the side of that thing. And so like I always kind of had cameras, and like my mom had video cameras and stuff when I was a kid, but it never was really like, man, I really want to go down this path. But what I got into was like website design, graphic design, and like kind of like animation when like Macromedia Flash was like a thing, and like it was kind of like all just computer-based stuff. And so I was working for Verizon Wireless as like a tech support person. Like I didn't go to college. Oh man, this was like 2021.
Okay.
And so I was working for Verizon and doing a bunch of like tech stuff for them. And on the side, I started in high school like a website design business in Asheville, and it was great. Like I did my high school website. I had clients.
So you already have that entrepreneurial itch.
It was there for sure.
Okay,
it was there. And so I had this like stupid idea that I was also gonna like start like trying to fix computers for people. Okay. And one of my clients ended up being like the karaoke company in town. So they would be the ones that if you went into like the random bar on a Tuesday and it was like Tuesday night karaoke, it was like this one guy had like the stronghold on bars in Asheville.
He cornered the market. Okay.
And so I like did a deal with him where I would like, help him out with stuff. And in the booklet that he had that had all the list of the karaoke songs that they put the logo of my like company on the thing. It was like in the hodgepodge with like the ATV company and the whatever, like that was like sponsoring this guy, right? So, but it made me start going out to these karaoke nights and kind of supporting him and kind of just hanging out and getting to know people. And one of the guys I became really great friends with, one of their like DJs also worked at the local radio station in Asheville. He was a night guy on the top 40 station. And he hit me up out of the blue one day and goes, "Hey man, we've like launched this whole like digital side of radio. There's a job opening that we've got. You should like come apply, like if you want to do something like that." And I had this great job with Verizon, kind of doing all these things. And for some reason, I was like, yeah, that sounds great. So I go apply. I go through this short interview process. And the next thing I know, 2 weeks later, I'm quitting Verizon. I'm taking a 50% pay cut, and I'm going into a whole new industry that I have no idea about. And so my job there was they had 8 radio stations. And so I was, at the time, this is such a dated title, I was the webmaster.
Okay.
Right?
That's cool.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you probably remember like when that was like a thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so like my job was managing and kind of helping build, develop, and create stuff on these websites. Social media was not really a thing at the time. There was MySpace, and this time Facebook was still college kids only. So, you know, social wasn't a thing. We had like email newsletters, and, you know, it was really this weird time in the world in the radio industry and a lot of entertainment, because in radio, you never knew the faces of the people that you listened to because there wasn't really a visual media.
Sure.
If you didn't go to where they were doing a remote broadcast or anything else, you never saw these people. And so I started working for, it was at the time called Clear Channel, and just over the years grew with them as a company. I worked in Asheville for like 5 years. And then in 2010, they asked me to move to Nashville. Nashville called and they're like, hey, we'd love for you to come. And so that's like a promotion. You're moving up in market size and all that. So I go to Nashville, and I work here for a year, and then I end up moving to Phoenix to do the same thing. And so that's a bigger promotion, right? Phoenix is a top 10 market. There's more people. It's a lot more responsibility. So I ended up working in Phoenix for like 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
And then I got the opportunity to move back to Nashville because now it's iHeartRadio. Like a lot's happened, right? I'm giving you the very condensed version, but within that company, a lot's happened, and it's turned into iHeartRadio. And iHeartRadio launched in Nashville. It's called the iHeart Country brand. So it like encompasses,
I think I remember that.
Yeah, so it encompasses like 154 country radio stations like across the country, right? Yep. So they wanted somebody to come back and join like the national side of the iHeart brand, but be based in Nashville and facilitate all the content through that brand. So that role entailed, I was, solo shooting all the video and photos in town, and it included a little editorial, a little social, but not much, but predominantly a lot of photo and video, kind of covering things in town, working with artists as they were launching, new campaigns and promotions. Also working with the Bobby Bone Show. So I was really closely, that's how Bobby and I got to know each other really well. Obviously, he did his podcast. So that was kind of like my world. And then when Luke moved to town, I started hearing through the grapevine about this guy from Asheville that moved to town, and I started
like,
hearing
Asheville.
some
Ding,
right.
ding, ding,
it
ding.
kind of like light, the light kind of went off.
Yeah.
And for me, I didn't, there's no one from Asheville really. I mean, that moves to Nashville for stuff like that. And so I like reached out to him just through Twitter. Like I didn't have his phone number. I knew we had through a few mutual friends, but I shot him a DM on Twitter and I was like, hey man, from Asheville as well. It's like, I've been in the industry for a while. If there's anything I can ever do to help, let me know. There's going to probably be a lot of people that give you bad advice, and I might be one of those people reaching out to you that ends up giving you bad advice. But like, if there's anything I can do to help, like, let me know. And minutes later, he's like, hits me back, dude, sounds great, awesome, let's go to lunch tomorrow.
Yeah.
And so the next day, we go to lunch at Tavern, RIP Tavern. It's not here anymore, and we have like a 2-hour lunch, and he like lays out his career path. Wow. Like he's already like business savvy, talks about like how they're doing these weekend shows and the money and all of the, like how they're doing everything. And I'm like, no one talks like this.
Sure.
No one is this intentional with so many things, that doesn't have a label deal, that doesn't have, I mean, he didn't have anything at this point. He had a manager. That was it. You think he had a booking agent. I think he was with UTA at the time, which was, his very first like booking deal. And so from that moment, like we just kind of connected, and it was like, hey, if you need anything, let's keep this relationship going, but would love to kind of help out.
Wow.
3 months later from that point, he played his first big headlining show in Asheville at the Orange Peel.
Okay. Yeah.
And
I know the Orange. I love that.
I went home and I was like, I gotta be here for this. And so I went home and I turned it into being able to do a feature on him. Still no label deal at this point, but I did a feature on him for iHeart Country to kind of help him out. So went early, we did like an interview thing, and then I shot the show. It was the first time I'd ever shot one of his shows. And so from that moment, it was weird because he went through a few, like, they brought a couple different guys out for like stints and all that sort of stuff. But then like we kind of started building this like really close like relationship. And so whenever he, you know, got inducted to, you know, played his first show at the Opry, like I got the call to like be there with him, like at the Opry. And then, you know, when he got,
Did he call you?
It was a mix between like him and his manager. Like we all started kind of developing this relationship.
That's a special call, right? When you
yeah,
get the call
for sure.
From
when it's like, hey, like let's go hang out, let's go do this thing. Yeah, and so you know, there would always be like these kind of momentous things that would happen that you know I was just there for. You know, I wasn't getting paid. I never asked for anything. But it was like, I was just like, hey, like this is cool to kind of be here for and kind of document, right? So it's like, you know, first night at the Opry, getting inducted into the Opry, you know, which was super cool to be there to like shoot and film that. And first 2 nights playing at the Ryman, like all these like little kind of like milestone things, right? And then he went back and headlined the arena in Asheville, which was his first arena show ever. And so I was like there for that, which is like really cool. And so
you found yourself in all those.
So it was in really
those
like milestone little moments. And then in 2019, he was getting ready to do his first big headlining tour. Okay. And they had reached out and they're like, hey, like, you know, we're now to the point where we're like trying to do something full time. And it just didn't kind of work out, you know, when you're a younger artist like that, and I'd had such an established career, I couldn't really just jump ship for that. But halfway through that tour, he kind of switched up kind of directions that they went with the video guy that they had on that tour. And I got the call and was like, hey, like we really need, you know, to figure something out for the back half of this like headlining tour.
They really were seeking for you.
Yeah. And this was the big tour, right? So this tour had, you know, Jameson Rogers was the opener, Morgan was the direct support, and then Luke was the headliner. And so it's like there's a lot going on with the back half of this tour. And so I worked it out with iHeart, and you know, I worked it out with them. So I kind of went out Fridays, Saturdays on this tour. The thing that was tough is this was a whole West Coast leg of the tour, right? So getting here from there, like they were out for like 6 or 8 weeks. And so
you kept flying back.
So I kept flying back and forth. So I would do my day job and then I would, you know, fly out, shoot a couple shows, fly back, and then do that
double dip energy.
Double dip that. I mean, that was my whole fall for 2019. Wow. And then we kind of had those conversations of like, okay, like what does this look like, you know, in the future? And my contract with iHeart was coming up in March of 2020. And so it was like, okay, this is like time. Like, so we, you know, figured out kind of what that would look like. And I was just going to not renew my contract. So I was sitting on the plane in March of 2020, getting to fly to C2C. And they had already been over there. And so I was getting ready to fly to C2C. It was going to be my last like hurrah with them. I was going to come back, do my last 3 weeks with iHeart, and then kind of move into this new capacity with him. And I get a call as I'm on the plane, like, hey, get off, like we're coming home. And I was like, what? And I was like, yeah, the world's shutting down. Like, get off the plane. We're coming home. Yeah, man. And so I get off the plane and like no one really kind of knows what's happening. They get back the next day. And then about a week goes by, you know, obviously everybody thought it was just going to be like, hey, it's just going to be like a week. And it wasn't. So he calls me and he goes, hey, like, come out to the house. Like, I feel like we got to do something. And so that's when we started filming like cover videos and posting online. Yeah. And I think 2 weeks later, we did the first like Facebook live stream. Sure. And then like 3 weeks after that, he wrote 6 Feet Apart, which is like the song that went, you know, it became like the anthem for people like during the pandemic. And then we did a live stream around that. And we go into the studio when everyone's saying not to, right? Like Sony's saying not to, SAG-AFTRA's saying not to, like everybody's like, you can't get in a studio right now. Like this is not possible. So there's like 3 people in the studio, the producer, Luke, and me. And it's like, it's the weirdest, eeriest thing ever. And so through the pandemic, you know, I spent probably more time with him than outside of, you know, my girlfriend at the time, like, you know, now fiance, but like than her. Like I was at his house multiple times a week, but it's like we built all this cool content during the pandemic. We did all these cool things. And so now it's like we have this relationship that's, super cool and awesome. I know that was a very long-winded version to like get to like what you asked, but like,
see, I came up it's interesting hearing that perspective in a lot of the guests that come on the podcast, because there's the new thing is a lot of photographers, content creators are getting salary jobs at, whether it's through management or through the artists, and there's an exclusive to it, whereas me, I kind of came up through I call it the lottery system. I mean, you write your treatments, you're only as good as your last job, so it's interesting always to hear where you came, how you came up, and then how you got, established into a big artist brand.
Yeah, what's weird is, and honestly, what's cool about my situation with him is like, I've got my own company. Like he's obviously my number one focus, but then, I'm allowed to, I go off and do other stuff with like other people as well. And
that's great.
And I'm able to kind of build a true business. You know what I mean? He's like the tentpole foundation of that.
Sure.
But it's the bigger business. And there's a lot of pieces to that too, because it's like, I came into it like a completely different way. Like I'm a lot like you are in the sense of my relationship, I didn't come to it through the label, right? Because a lot of these newer artists, the label is connecting them with people, right? Because of working in radio for so long, I worked with so many, like basically every artist you can ask for through that, because they came to radio to promote it. They were coming on Bobby's show. They were doing all this stuff. So I built the relationships with the artists and the managers through that.
You're right.
And
that's how I did mine.
You know what I mean? So it's like when I get, I don't really solicit for a lot of stuff, but when I get those inquiries, it's coming from those paths.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, I'll see somebody and they're like, hey, we should do something. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's like, it's a lot like you are with people. And I feel like that's not the norm that happens, right? Yeah. Now it's a lot of, you kind of got to hit the lottery in a sense of attach yourself to someone at an early age that you think will rise, that you can kind of stick with. And
put in your time.
Who knows, right? What's going to happen with that? And it's weird too, because I really felt like that the pandemic was a tipping point in a lot of this business. I mean, we can go to, I can tell you 6 different ways that it drastically changed just like our side of the business, but it also caused a lot of those lower, people just getting started. It caused them to have to go a different path, because for such a long period of time, there wasn't the business there. There was nothing for people to do, because not a lot of artists had to, furlough their band or furlough their crew. So they weren't even, they weren't making money. So it's like they weren't able to pay someone to help them do stuff during the pandemic. And so now you've got different, the crop of people is a lot different now post-pandemic in the content world than it was pre-pandemic.
Did you feel like did you have specific mentors when you were studying? I mean, I studied like a surgeon, different photographers, mainly directors, music videos. I would watch them. I mean, what was your inspiration? Did you have to keep it moving?
It's weird. I think I probably have a lot more inspiration than I can just like quote off, because I consumed so much. Because like I'm in that realm of, I did grow up, watching MTV and, grew up with actual magazines, but then also am on that precipice of the digital side of stuff. And I'll tell you, like, for the years of working with iHeart, I had to work with a lot of Getty content. And one of the number one things that I can tell you that shifted my perspective of probably my personal preference of good and bad is working with so much of that stuff and picking it apart and all the things that I saw every day having to work with those images that I didn't like.
Sure.
And which then helped kind of develop and let me kind of create my own thing. You know what I mean?
I was going to ask that because I no matter what I shoot, it's personal. Yeah. And if I have to just frivolously shoot and present, I can't take it. And if it's just used in like a revolving door of footage, I can't get in bed with that. And I make it very, very known that it's personal to me. And that was a question I did have for you, where you're shooting, you're not even really creating. For Getty, you're just capturing time and place, and then just servicing it, and that gets gone. Next job, boom. Next artist. Where can you own it? Where can you put your soul into it and say, no, this right here isn't. This is just tip of the iceberg. Let me work at getting those deeper photos, those bigger moments.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I understand the magnitude of the opportunity. Mm-hmm. Like if you were to tell somebody like, hey, you're going to get to help document the career of Garth Brooks, and you tell them that today and you look back on the work, that he's had and the career he's had, they'd be like, man, that was like, people are in the future are relying on what you do to be able to historically relive that person's
and
career.
How much you care.
You know what I mean?
Yes. How much you put into it.
And so every time, I'm fortunate enough that like I'm with him in the studio. I'm with him sometimes even when they're writing songs. If he does a writing retreat, I'm right there the whole time. He'll have guys rotate in and out every couple days. But, we were in Montana for almost a month, camped out in a cabin, right? And so it's like, he's there for the month. I'm there for the month. Everybody else is rotating, every 3 days, 4 days. And I understand the magnitude of what that moment is.
Me too.
Because I hear those songs being created. I'm sitting there, filming for 8 hours in a day, or and also like taking some photo, and I get that like people are relying on, that's what the world's going to see from this moment. And so it's like, how can I make sure to capture it correctly and tell that story properly?
Now, is your refinement when you're there and you're capturing, I mean, do you put I put the pressure on myself daily that I need to come out with the banger, at least one that day. And that's kind of where my nickname comes in, Spidey, is because I'm moving around, I'm finding, and I'm not satisfied. Or when you'll know when I'm satisfied, 'cause you'll see my vision goes from here, here. Next thing you know, I'm like, I got it. I know, sure. And you're trying to somewhat control chaos. But yeah, I have that feeling where I wake up for that. Let's just say it would be Montana. I have that at the forefront of my mind, not just to capture. Many times with the artists I work for, they don't want to see average stuff. They want to see the one. So I might, in a couple hours worth of work, I might show them 3 photos. Mm-hmm. Is that kind of how? Yeah,
and I think it's even more different for me too, because like in a situation like that, like I'm also there to like film the rights. And in a writing session, I'm going to, there's obviously, yes, I'm looking to get like those shots that like help communicate that moment, like the most, unique way possible. Sure. But it's also about capturing like that song being written and the process of that. And where I've refined that over time is I edit obviously my own stuff as well. And so like and that's when it's like the worst critic. When you're having to be the one to like sift through the 4 hours of bad footage that you shot,
of course,
to find the clip that you're looking for. And when you know in your mind, I need this shot to go into this video to make this complete. And if you got it, then you find it. But then when you realize if you didn't get it, you're like, okay, that's not happening again.
Yeah.
And now that I'm probably 4 of those type trips like in with him, like my mentality going into that trip now is, you know, every time is completely different than it was the first one that I walked into, because I've been through it now.
Now, do you guys talk bigger picture when you are there and you're 4 times? I mean, because I'm sure you have to create maybe some kind of recap or of sorts, but I mean, are you mentally thinking, I was talking to Troy before you got here, Pearl Jam 20, one of my favorite documentaries, you know, this is a documentary of footage that spanned 20 years of a very big artist that you would have expected to have seen that footage. But then when you see this 2-hour film, every clip is something that diehard fans like me have never seen.
Yeah, so it's really, I have a very unique role with Luke that I don't know exists in town a lot. So in the creative director role, kind of what we've defined that as is I'm in charge of his entire visual brand. So I'm leading album packaging. I'm leading music videos. I'm leading the presentation of the live show. So that's all the content that runs on the screens, the flow, like not necessarily the flow of the show, because the band director and Luke kind of creates the set list, but the visual representation, all the IMAG, everything that kind of happens with that. Like I'm leading the charge on that as well. Whenever we're going to do like a bigger video project, like that's, it all kind of runs through me. Like if he's going to be on a TV show, I'm going to work with them to deliver the imagery and the storytelling and all that. So with that hat on, when we're in a situation like a writing retreat,
Sure.
I'm thinking 25 years down the road and
There you
also
go.
5 minutes down the road.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
for the last tour, I mean, I have almost 200 terabytes of archived footage from the world tour.
Anxiety.
A month.
Do you have it all backed up? And
A month in Australia and a month in Europe, plus, you know, whatever it was, 14 stadium shows. Well, there's a lot that comes from that. And so I have to like look at it from such a, you know, a micro and a macro, just to make sure that it's my 10-year in the future self does not look back at my present self and be like, you're an idiot and you were lazy that day and you didn't get that thing when we really need that right now.
Yeah. Now, are you responsible to work with the director of the video or the photographer if it wasn't you that was deemed because of a specific style or whatever?
Yeah, for sure.
So you would
speak
speak the language, because Luke and team don't as much, and they employ you to get into the weeds and make sure that best interests are and
absolutely
communicate it back.
Yeah, like you and I loosely talked about this the last time we met, but it's like I don't really have that aspiration of being like the director for the music video or any of that sort of stuff. But kind of the way our flow works for a music video is if we decide that we're going to do one, I'll have a conversation with him, be like, hey, what are you thinking? You know, here's kind of what I'm thinking. You know, where's this kind of land? And then whenever we have the director, I'll do a call with them and be like, okay, here's kind of where we want to go with it. This is kind of what we're loosely thinking. You know, this is Luke's interpretation of this.
Yeah.
You know, send me back like 3 treatments, one that kind of goes down this path, one that maybe deviates from it, and then use your wildest imagination. Because the number one thing that, like, being a creative person, I never want to put another creative person in a box. And so, because I respect that
Sure.
enough that like I don't want to like ask somebody to do, because I'm sure you've been in those situations. I've been in those situations where it's like you were hired because of who you are, but then when you get there, they're like, we just need you to do this thing, and you're like, you get hired to take photos, and if it's like if they ask you like, hey, come in and take a headshot, you're like, well, I can take a headshot, but I'm not a headshot photographer.
Yeah, sure.
And so I don't ever want to do that to someone else. And so like with his last photo shoot, we did 2 albums worth of photos in like an hour and a half with Jeremy Cowart, who's an incredible photographer, lives down in Franklin. But Jeremy he's got this really cool process. And I told him, he was like, hey, what do you want to do? I was like, well, I need this shot. This is what we're going to do for the album cover. I need this shot, but then let's play. And so let's get what we need for sure. And then I also need all these press images and all this other stuff, because heaven forbid in today's world, 2 outlets use the same photo.
Yes.
And so then we just kind of let it, play and then see what we come up with.
That's a very interesting thing. Do you feel like, with one thing that I've made a line in the sand with the changing of the industries, constantly being told content, I try to draw some line in the sand so that I can still do me at my best. I don't feel, there was a period when it was all happening that I felt like I had to keep up with everyone. I had to do what was being done. Okay, I need to post more. I need to do this more. I need to keep up with the Joneses. I feel like I've come into a good stride now where I just have blinders on and I'm in my lane. Yeah. And I've taken a very stringent effort to make it so that the lane that I'm in is narrow, and that hopefully no one is in that lane, so I can go Mach 110 and no distractions. It's taken a lot of mental effort, a lot of anxiety, ups and downs. Do you deal with that, or do you feel like because you have more of a salary position that those insecurities or those doubts or whatever, do they creep in, and do you feel like you have to keep up? Or
yeah, I don't necessarily know that it's like keeping up, but it's like I think I hold myself to like a really high standard. And it's like I want to keep pushing myself like consistently to learn new things, to try new stuff. You know what I mean? Because I feel like that like with every new thing that you like learn or push yourself to get to dive into, you make yourself better. And so with every step of the way, whether it's, and again, I know that you don't do a lot of this stuff, but like it's what, with the world that I've kind of had to live in, it's helped me, right? Like I color grade my own videos, and I spent a year diving into color grading and working with people that are colorists to like, I'm not going to go color a feature film, but I can get pretty, like for what we're doing, I can make it really, it's better than just throwing a LUT on it for sure. Right.
Yeah.
But by learning color, I feel like that my filmmaking accelerated, because it's just like we were talking about. I know, like I had to work with my crappy footage, right? Yeah. I'm not going to overexpose that shot again because I know what happened. And it's kind of like the same way, my thing for this year that I've really dove into is like film photography, you know what I mean? And so I'm, a couple months into that, but I can already see that shifting and growing my, digital photography side, or just my eye, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't necessarily feel like I have to like chase anything, but I feel like I put this pressure on myself to like continuously grow, because I know if I'm doing that, then the work's going to grow in itself, and, I'll be able to handle situations differently.
Yeah, I'm absolutely. Now, what I'm hearing, what you said a few minutes ago, you said, I might be off a little bit. I thought you said you don't have interest in directing, in doing that. But with what you just said, learning and growing, what is it about directing or that you don't want to do? Because what I just heard you say is you're moving your future focus into photo, which is in very much in my wheelhouse of what I'm doing. You know, I've directed, 160 some videos, and I find that photo is my secret love child. I hold on to it so close because it's just my style is me and the artist. So I can relate to what you're saying, but I would like to pick apart. What is it about the directing part that doesn't interest you?
I think for me, it maybe doesn't not necessarily not interest me. Probably was a bad choice of like my own words, but it's like I've had to live in this like, I'll call it like one man band world for the majority of my career. You know, I didn't come up knowing a lot of the other, you know, tour videographers or tour photographers in town. Like, you know, I've loosely met a lot of them, just happened to be on the road, right, over the years. And it's like, I don't have that, you know, circle of people that I, you know, kind of grew up with, and that also like, okay, well, this videographer shifted into being a DP, and then this guy shifted into being a director, and then they all kind of like go to get, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Then like that you find your crew and then you kind of do your thing.
Yeah.
And so I think I've had to live on, you know, in this like one man band world for so long that maybe the idea of that is just like daunting to me.
I would agree with you. That's what I was thinking. I think
Yeah.
we might have touched on that the last time that
for sure.
we talked, you know, because that's, you know, I mean, hell, I'll admit it. The podcast, I almost didn't do it out of fear.
Yeah.
You know, there's things that fear stop. Fear is also a strong word, just doubts and all the insecurities that kind of do it. Do you feel like, well, I mean, if you are doing it all yourself, more or less, you said, the one-man band, do you ever see yourself trying to attempt a video and maybe saying, okay, I mean, for example, you just said a lot of the way you came up, and I would agree, because you came up in around 2021-ish, 20, right? With the content movement, you know, and it was a bit of the YouTube, learn it on that, where does my background, does that sound foreign to you? Do you know, I mean, you're a director at a production company. You have executive producers, and it's not your production company. And there's directors reps, and you get your executive, your rep solicits you a treatment. You get the brief. You spend 3 days, you write it up, and hope for the best. You know, that's why I call it a lottery ticket. You're against 10 other directors. You get that job, and I mean, you just feel like you won the lottery, you know, and now you're in this job. So it wasn't as easily retained. You weren't easily getting these jobs. So when you did get it, it meant the world. And so when you're in those jobs and now you're shooting film, it's just a whole different paradigm than what we are living in now. And for me, coming from the early 2000s to now, there is a massive 180 change between where I came and where we are now. Yours coming in at 21 to 24, there's a lesser curve on the pendulum.
Yeah, I mean, but it was like, you know, it was 2006 when I really started like in the music world, right? And so I've seen it all like over the course of that. But I think a couple parts to that is, you know, I grew up in a really small town, and so the ideas and aspirations of, you know, no one in my family had went to college, right? Like my dad's the only one out of his brothers that even graduated high school type thing, right? And so what's possible in the world wasn't necessarily like always there, right?
Interesting.
And so like I'm one of the few people like in my family that even left
Broke
Asheville.
out.
You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so it's like it's weird because so much has happened in my life as just like a stepping progression based off of the last thing that happened. And a lot of like hard work and all that it's like there hasn't been this, okay, that's where I've got to get to. It's always been like, there's not like a finish line. I'm just going to run as hard as I can and work as hard as I can. And I know that if I do that, like great things are going to happen along the way.
That's interesting because I always was set out with like, I want to do X budget videos. I want to break into I remember at the very beginning, it was like Bone Thugs was about $250,000, and you're like, okay, I want to get to 500,000, and next thing you know, you're doing a $500,000 Duran Duran. And then when it shifts, your next video is 90,000. You're like, what just happened? And for me, it was just, it's being young and doing $500,000-$600,000 budgets, $300,000-$400,000 budgets, and then having to more or less, since the beginning, your budgets are going down, and you're maintaining this relevancy through your work. It's been very difficult to keep that level of craftsmanship when you came from one, and you're having. I've had to relearn the business, or not the business, but the creative, the cameras, the way it's done. From where I started to where we are now, some would say I'm not necessarily a one-man band. But I mean, I got my boy Troy, my crews, and how I refined my video work, my directing. I don't enjoy the big shows. I don't want a crew of 50 anymore. Those aren't fun. I feel boxed in. I can't move. Can't discover as fast. So I definitely feel like I've taken the way of the world, or shift in our business, and applied it to the best way I can to what I'm doing. You know what I mean? I and it's been such a learning process for me to almost relearn the business.
Yeah, it's like, well, I'd love to have your perspective on this, because it's like, I feel like, because I hear it, right? We work with labels. Like we have those conversations. Are we going to do a music video? Are we not going to do a music video? I know the position that budgets are in now versus where budgets used to be for videos. And it's like, it's almost like they're a little bit like disposable now, right? It's like, it's the last thought. You get through everything else, and it's like, oh, okay, well, are we going to do a music video or not?
And that's crazy, because that's the most expensive part of your marketing budget as far as assets.
And so, but you still have those artists that want to leave that kind of career legacy of great music videos, and will still spend the money, and will still do the thing. But those are fewer and far between now. And so it's, again, I think it's that post-pandemic shift that I was talking about earlier, because now that we're into this, the thing I think the pandemic changed so much is everybody was consuming from their phone.
Yeah.
Everybody was creating from their phone. Quality
sure
went down.
Yeah.
In multiple areas. You never really saw pre-pandemic artists posting demos or work tapes on social media. Well, now they're teasing these songs, they're doing all this other stuff. And when you read the comments after the master comes out, some of the top comments are always, I'd rather have the demo, I'd rather have the work tape.
I was just told, I think a listener on the podcast said something about to one of our clips was something to the effect of iPhone, TikTok or iPhone creative visuals rank like 10 times better than production does, produced work. I sat with that for a second, you know, and that's a very pragmatic approach, you know, and it was like, you know, get on board or fall away. And I will say it on the podcast. That's a very pragmatic perspective and viewpoint, and I'm sure it's probably right. But at some point, art has to be elevated beyond pragmatic. And so I won't get in bed with pragmatic. And maybe I'm lucky enough to have jumped through the window before it shut completely. But I live, breathe, sleep shooting artful work, both in directing and both in photo. And I hate to think that would be something that I would subscribe to. How do you feel about just that comment alone?
I mean, I think there's probably some truth to it, right?
No doubt, there's truth.
But I think, here's what I think. I think that everything is cyclical. And Instagram isn't today what it was, 6-7 years ago.
Sure.
TikTok won't be 6-7 years from now what it is today. YouTube didn't exist, and it became one of the greatest things for the video world, right? Because it brought so many more like eyes and opportunities to things. But I think that in the end, art always comes back around. Like things always go back to the things that really worked, even when we go a bunch of different paths.
Sure.
I mean, you look at like me talking about getting back into film. Well, there's a huge resurgence of film. The idea of shooting film is the least practical thing on the planet.
Exactly.
It's so expensive. The process is ridiculous, right?
It takes, yep.
But there's something about it that is nostalgic and makes you feel different.
It fuels you. It fuels you to go out and create it.
And so I think, going back to your question though, I think the problem with a lot of this is people are overstimulated. We aren't created as humans to be consuming this much.
I agree.
So you get numb to everything that you consume. And part two of that is we're reliant on the algorithms of these apps to deliver our content to the viewers. And so it's, as the old saying goes, if you're not paying for the product, you are the product, right? And so it's like, that's what, like, you're getting Instagram for free and you don't get to control what happens on your Instagram, right? And so it's like, we've put so much focus on social media. This is the marketing tool. This is the whatever. And it's biting a lot of people, it's going to bite a lot of people in the butt because it's your, I don't know what the best way to put this is, like you're giving up a lot of the art to get the eyeballs, right?
I've said this I almost say this every other episode. When I was coming up, you were creating art. All intentions were to create the art. The money, the prep, the discussions, when you're in the job, everything. And then what other assets you can create from that piece, go for it. Nowadays, it's not. Like you just said, oftentimes the very last thing committed to is the music video because they want the content first. Oh. Yeah, go make your art with whatever you can with the content. It's like swimming upstream. You see, and so the very last thing to fall off the wayside is the art, the creative. And they wonder why they're not getting a return on their investment. And that's, to me, it's in like what you've been bringing to light is the pandemic, in my opinion. Hell, it's not my opinion. It proved that good enough can work in our music business.
It's where everyone lives.
Exactly, it's good enough. I'm going to invest 5 seconds at best, move on to the next. And that's where that's.
Well, I have so I bring I bring another guy out to help me film these stadium shows. And because it's just covering a stadium show is, I mean, going up the steps and just getting around a stadium is a nightmare.
Absolutely.
And so just in an effort to have good coverage, I bring someone else out. And he does commercial productions in Southern like California and like the Fresno area. And he literally called me the other day because he got a job doing a shoot for like a major hotel chain, and their requirement for the shoot that it was shot on an iPhone 15 Pro Max. They didn't want anything else. They literally wanted it shot on an iPhone. And he goes, "This is insane. This is a major agency commissioning a 5-figure job shot on an iPhone."
ProRes iPhone with the SD with the
Yes.
Yeah, I
It's unbelievable to me. But you know what? Good enough, I guess. And I don't know where that mindset comes from. You know, I know that like fans, we kind of hear that fans engage with some of the iPhone content more because it doesn't feel produced. It feels raw. It feels like they're watching something they shouldn't be seeing. It feels like that there's like a fly on the wall type idea thing there. And I guess that's you could probably dive into that, psychoanalysis
does it ever end?
Of the whole thing, but
Where
it doesn't.
does it go? I mean,
right. Yeah, it's a never ending like black hole. And I think just like as a musical artist, you stay true to who you are, you put your art out, and like it or love it, this is like who I am. And I think you kind of have to do that from the other side, as well.
There's been a few moments in my career where I've self-analyzed like the turning points in when I felt like I made jumps, based off of a photo or a music video. Has there been a photo or a moment in your journey that you felt like this is I'm there. I'm riding the wave I want to be on. Because you've made a lot of lateral jumps.
Yeah.
And by the way, very admirable that you've been chasing what feeds you.
Yeah.
You've left very predominant and cush positions to land into now what seems to be a very you're confident in your position, but at first it wasn't. And you're jumping, you're moving, but I feel like from what you've been saying, you've been chasing your dream, or you've been chasing your passion.
For sure, definitely passion.
Has there been a moment that you felt like that was it? A time or place, a photo, a thing?
Well, there's a couple different arms to that. The first big, or the last really big one was, so obviously we're from Asheville, North Carolina, and last year we played 2 nights at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte where the Panthers play. And I followed him, up on the stage for the first night with, whole gimbal thing, where those awkward people that people see on stage, they aren't necessarily supposed to be there. But I followed him kind of over the ramp onto the stage, and then kind of walked off to the side and like stood there and like kind of just like took it in for a minute, because it's like, that's the stadium that I grew up, going to watch football games in, and going to, watch ACC championship games in, and like all this stuff. And it was like, I'm on this ride now that's brought me back to this place in a completely different capacity with, this guy that I love like a brother that's on stage. And it's like, it was like one of those like kind of, it wasn't necessarily a moment that I captured, but it was like a moment that I was in that I was like, man, this is freaking cool.
Did you snap some pictures of it? And
I have it for sure.
Know what it is?
Yeah, I have it for sure.
Describe the photo that you think from that would be the one.
Oh man.
Is there?
Yeah, there was one where I went up to the top of the arena or like the top of the stadium, and you can see the skyline of Charlotte with like these like ominous clouds, and you see the Bank of America, and you see the whole thing that
sold
just
out.
That whole thing just I mean, you know, that's the part that's never gets old with this is like, but then you have
watching it grow.
Then you have these moments of like, you know, the flip side of that is like we played 2 nights at Foxborough where the Patriots play, and the first night it poured rain the whole time. And, you know, I'm sure you guys you've seen like the iconic photos of Taylor because she played here in Nashville in the rain, right? Yeah. But like it's the same, like it was dumping rain. Like if I showed you this footage, it's like absolutely like the hardest I've ever seen it rain in my life. And he's out there playing the whole time, and we just like went for it.
Yeah.
And I just was like, this is a moment that we're not getting back. If it ruins the camera, it ruins the camera.
Oh, yeah, bro.
And we just go for
all
it.
Day.
And there's insurance for a reason, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I feel like I shot it all in like 4K 60, so it's all just super slow-mo, like tasty rain stuff. And it's like, those are the ones that I'm like, okay, like down the road when we make a documentary, like that's going in that. You know what I mean? So do
you have that in your mind as something you must do?
Yeah.
You're sitting on all this footage now, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that like it'll eventually be something that I think is like owed to like his career. You know, the fans will be owed something, you know, and who knows when that is or what that is or, you know, whatever. But it's like, it's hard to have, you know, just like there's, you know, Morgan's got to have a documentary, right? Like there's so many stories to tell in his career that when he gets to the point that he wants to just let it all out there, you know what I mean? Like, and so I feel like Luke's the same way. It's like you have these people with these like, you know, meteoric rises, and when you're on the top of every chart and you're a, you know, those are 2 guys that are bringing more people into country from outside of country that, you know, you owe it to kind of the world to kind of show that at some point. Yeah. And I love music documentaries. You know, I'm a big fan of them, and I watch almost all of them that comes out. Do you have a favorite? I mean, the Coldplay one was really cool. I love the Ed ones because, you know, we've became, you know, friends with Ed because he's come out to a couple of our shows and Luke did a song with him, and I love how just kind of fly on the wall raw that the Ed ones are, you know, which is, I feel like you have to have a confident artist that's willing to be vulnerable enough to allow that to even be captured in the first place, you know. But like those are the ones that like really inspire me because you do feel like you're seeing the things that like, you know, you're not supposed to see.
Have you seen Metallica, Some Kind of Monster?
Yeah, for sure.
Shit,
it's so good. It's
band
so
almost
good.
Broke up.
Yeah,
documentary had to be postponed for a year.
I mean,
James goes to rehab, comes out a different person. All on camera. Then they have those meetings to talk about, are we really going to keep documenting this?
Yes. Yeah, you have to, right? It's like
it's rock and roll.
Yeah.
Now, do you feel like, you know, you've taken what I'm trying to say is like, I'm intrigued because of your salary position versus me. I'm still on 28 years of freelance. Yeah. But I work many people think I am salary with many artists. Sure. And I'm not. I just get the phone calls from them. Would you do it any differently? You know, I mean, it's hard to say, but I mean,
with him, no, right? Like, because I obviously for the first, you know, those first like kind of 4 years I was doing, you know, all that stuff with him. I mean, that's all mine, right? So it's like there's some really cool stuff in that. Yeah. But we've got like a good enough relationship that like, you know, as long as he'll have me around, I'm in this one for like the long haul, right? I'm gonna do all the other stuff. You know, I get to do a lot of fun stuff on the side, and you know, work with other artists, or you know, dive into the golf passion and do some work in that space and all that sort of stuff. But with him, no, it's like it's such a good. It is a truly like a family, and I know a lot of people say that, but there's, you know, there's a lot of truth to that in a lot of different camps, and you know, I definitely probably wouldn't approach it any different. I'm definitely blessed to be here. I mean, everybody that would want to do anything like this would probably trade places with me in 2 seconds.
I think working for Luke Combs would be, he seems like such a genuine guy who just is passionate about what he does.
Well, and he's just given me so much like space to grow myself, trusting me with the live show content. That was I didn't have any real experience in that when I started doing all that sort of stuff. You're kind of
building the plan as you go. And some of these areas, you're like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll take. You don't say no. You just get it and research it. Or do you say, hey, I don't know much, but I do know research. Let me get into that.
Well, and that's definitely with the live show stuff, because it's like I didn't even know with the softwares that we use kind of what was possible. And we had commissioned a guy last year to kind of help build some content for the show. Mm-hmm. And it didn't really work out with him very well. And so like we had to kind of pull a 180 kind of on the fly with the kind of the way the show was going. And so we kind of, there was like 3 of us that had to kind of dig in, and that was like a true, like, we were in that arena until in that stadium till like 2 and 3 a.m., like going through the show for the next day to make sure it was like dialed in and right. And we did that for probably like 4 or 5 like straight weeks, like as we were adjusting stuff as we go. And we would start on the second the stage was up and there were LED walls and lights to be like used, we were in there every night trying to adjust and get the show like as perfect as it could be. And I learned so much in that process about what these live video production softwares can and can't do. And we're using some technology that's just unbelievable, but that was a great learning experience for me. And so now going into this year, we're like, okay, here's the few things we're going to change. We all have a better grasp on this. And, so that it just all kind of, it's all different,
Do you see so like moving forward, after what we've talked about, something that I am entering into for the first time myself now is seeing myself as a brand. Mm. I'm no longer just a director and a photographer. The business is adjusting. Times are changing. Do you, since you, again, back to, I feel like I have to be that way. I don't have the salary. So in many ways, I'm looking at myself as a brand. Do you see yourself as that moving forward into the future, even in a stable situation with Luke Combs, how to elevate you, how to sell some of your incredible photos? Because I'm sure Luke would be really on board with that if you're not, making coffee mugs. Do you have a line of sight daily, or what you want to do with your brand, Zack Massey, in your commitment with Luke Combs?
Yeah, I think honestly, one of the things that I want to do more than anything is like take what I'm learning and figure out how I can use that to help other people.
Okay,
you know what I mean? Because it's like there's you get thrown into this business.
Sure,
there's so many conversations that these young people coming into it, they don't have. No one explains contracts to them. No one explains money to them.
Now we're talking.
No one explains.
Go an hour in. Now we're going to get into the goodies. Yeah,
no one explains the dirt of the business. No one explains etiquette once you get yourself into a room. No one explains relationships. There's a million things that they don't tell people. And I used to feel like that there was a underlying like competitive vibe between all the content creators, video people, photographers, or whatever in town. And it's like I feel like now there's a lot more of a community aspect around it potentially. Like I'm still not close with a lot of people, but at least what I see on social media is a lot of people helping each other out and whatever. But I still think that, man, there's a lot that people could learn as they're getting into this business that would protect themselves and that they wouldn't get kind of screwed over,
Absolutely.
And so I just want to figure out, what it looks like of like how to like help people. Because at the end of the day, Like, I feel like if you don't pass down the knowledge that you've garnered over the years that you've been working, which I think is something that you're doing great with this.
Thank you.
Right? It's like even though like I want to hear you share more stories on here because like you're pulling a lot of stuff out of other people, but man, there's a lot that's like up here for you that, you know, hopefully like you get out in these, but it's really just, it comes down to like helping people.
Yeah.
You know, if you're making really great work and you can also be a really good human to other people along the way,
For sure.
then like, that's like, to me, that's like a successful life and
Selfless
career.
act.
You know?
Yes. I've recently found myself, a couple of young cats have hollered at me, and I have this analogy that I've used for myself. And I'd like to say it because I hope these young cats can learn it when they come up, but I use it as like, you're on a lily pad, right? And when you first start off, you're kind of small, right? On this big lily pad. And it feels good. And you got a lot of room to grow. Inevitably, though, that lily pad shrinks as you get more savvy and dream bigger, get more experience, right? Your eyes get wider. You want to do more. Lily pad gets smaller. At some point, you're going to jump, right? Those who jump into that murky water without a specific vision as where that lily pad in the distance of where you're going to go, you're going to jump in, and that water inevitably is going to try to take you out. Mm-hmm. Piranhas, everything in there, it's just sucking you down. You're making it work. You don't know what you're doing, but you're swimming. You know where you're going. But the problem is that water is taking you out. And there are lily pads all around you. You can choose to jump on that lily pad and save yourself. Breathe, catch your breath. Over time, that lily pad's going to drift. And next thing you know, you don't see the lily pad that you were once going for. Mm-hmm. You've been distracted. Time has gotten away from you. So a lot of the times I say to young creatives, before you jump, you have to know where you're going. Mm-hmm. You need to see that other lily pad to know what you're fighting for. Because at the end of the day, when you jump in that water, that is the artist journey. It's not sitting on that fucking lily pad. That's where you put all that swimming to use. So if you grab a lily pad quick after you jumped in to save yourself, you're not taking advantage of it. So I say that because that's how I've used I have pushed lily pads, and I've come inches from dying. But I make it. I make it there. I get on that lily pad, finally in the distance. Now you're like this. You're so small, but eventually it gets fat again. It gets big, and you get your confidence on that lily pad, and you do it over and over and over again. I digress, but that was important for me to want to say as we talk about, because I do love teaching. I love helping. I love talking about this stuff. I've seen so much, been there, done that. And now more than ever, I do feel like there's such a contrast between what people are, needing to know. I get DMs and they're just like, hey, what would you, and I give these long things and it's like, oh, it's only so much I can do.
Yeah. It's like, there's nowhere for people to go.
No,
they're
going to come to In the Trenches because we're going to talk about it.
Right, exactly. There's, at the end of the day, this is like one of the things that like people they want to know.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sure there's so many people out there now. It's like I saw this stat the other day. It's like one of the number one things that kids in elementary school, when he's asking, what do you want to be? It used to be astronaut. It used to be firefighter, whatever. It's YouTuber now. Right? And so it's like, that is the thing, like,
yeah,
it's so wild to me. And I think the thing that a lot of people have to be careful of and understand as they're getting into this business is like, you can develop your own brand and your own style as you go. But when you get into it, like, it's not about you.
Exactly.
You're there to do a job. and it's your job to do the best job that you can do. You're not there to get some cool stuff for your Instagram.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? And it's like, you have to like build that relationship and time and all that stuff before you're able to, you know, get to that point where things are a little bit different. But it's such a, you know what I mean? It's such a weird.
I very much do.
You know, the thing that like, oh my gosh, I don't even know that I want to say this. The thing that drives me more nuts than anything in this business is when you have young guys out with opening acts and they try to sneak out during the headlining act and take some photos or take some video, and then they on their social media will make it look like that headlining act hired them to do that.
Yeah. Think about what it says to the artist that's paying for them to be there.
Oh, there is nothing that drives me nuts more than that. Like, and I don't know if it's still, a thing or not. And I probably won't get in trouble for saying this, but there used to be a rule on the Kenny Chesney tour where the opening acts like couldn't take any photos from the stage behind, only photos from like the pit area tight.
Yeah.
Because that's a Kenny show.
Yeah.
You're there at a Kenny show, right? And so it's such a,
I would hope so. I mean,
Right.
that's a great rule.
you know, we don't put a rule like that in place for people because it's like, you know, everybody does things a little bit differently, but it's still, to me, if someone's trying to act another way, it's just, that just comes across as like super cringy, especially if you don't even ask for it, you know?
So what keeps you, last question.
Yeah. I'm getting off easy.
Yeah, we're getting some. Well, we never know. What keeps you going? What is it? Is it the creative? Is it your relationship with Luke Combs? Is it something deep inside you?
I think it's the chase of, you know, everybody says, you know, you've been there, right? Especially when you're shooting the same tour, you're shooting the same show every night. You know, they're kind of moving to the same places. They're kind of doing their same thing. And for a lot of people, that gets like super monotonous.
Yeah.
But for me, it doesn't, because like I'm chasing to get, I might have gotten a great, you know, let's say I got a great moving video shot of him shotgunning a beer or something, but it wasn't perfect.
Yeah, there you go.
So I'm going to shoot that again, like the next couple nights. Mm-hmm. And then once I get that, I'm like, okay, that was the one of that. That was the one of him kicking the
That's
cup
how I am.
or
That's
whatever,
exactly
right?
how I am.
And so I'm going to use that whole, my goal at the end of a tour is I want the shot from every moment where there's a moment to have the shot.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if I'm putting together a video, it's like, hey, this video is going to be 9 out of 10 because I spent this whole year like trying to get each of these specific moments.
I'm absolutely that way. My refinement is stupid. I mean, it could be a shadow. It could be something that I don't like. And I don't really retouch or do anything. I don't, you know, but it's just a moment I can get better.
For sure.
I have to think somewhat
Yeah.
in that space. Otherwise, you know, it's almost too easy,
Yeah.
you know?
And you can tell when people like go the easy route. If they're just out there firing away and snapping, and it's
your
like
laterals or horizons are all
Right.
off. It's sloppy, you know. Maybe you shouldn't have shot a wide because your wide looks wanky with the world around you. Get a longer lens, cut through some of that world, and get to the more precise thing. I did lie. I did say it was our last question, but I want to service our listeners properly with, like, let's get into it real quick. You said it a few minutes ago. I think too often creatives are going headstrong into that creative and not looking at it from a business. I would like to dive into the business of what we do. And not just say, "Oh yeah, we don't talk enough about it." Okay, hold up. This is my darn thing. We can stop time and do it again.
I love it.
What part of business would you? What part? 'Cause there's, contracts.
Huge.
I just got one to look at. I think, Troy. I forgot to get it to you. I can relate to this in the sense of anytime you have to talk numbers to someone or risk that the business side, aren't going to like you leaning in on something, you as a creative, usually feeling desperate to get the job, feel like if you lean in, they're going to go to someone else. If I ask for more money that I feel like I should have, they're just going to go to someone else. And maybe they do. How do you feel about that as far as setting out your trajectory for the big picture? Because the more you do cave in and go, yes, you're seen as that.
100%.
The power, I learned it somewhat late, and I kind of had to because I had agents and reps and executive producers. So the second half of my career has been kind of like on my company and my producers and stuff like that. The power of no.
Oh. So I'll give you two real life examples from me. So one of the things that I had to learn kind of the hard way that you're going to laugh at probably is because of the bigger productions that you've done and the way you kind of itemize every single piece out, whether it's catering or if it's, your DP or whatever, right? All the grip, the cameras, the whole 9 yards. I would always, because of being like the one man band guy, I would just, all right, well, here's my day rate. Here's an equipment rate. We're going to call it that when I was going to do like a one-off shoot. And I had a friend of mine challenge me that does big commercial productions. And he sent me a link to a Google sheet. He goes, you need to start using this and you need to fill in every single box with a number because you're leaving money on the table and you're not maximizing for yourself what's sitting out there. And
he's very right, and you're leaving thousands.
Oh, so the very next like commercial type shoot, client thing that I had, I was like, okay, what do I got to lose, right? They came to me for the job.
Yeah.
So boop, 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 boop. And it turned from a 4-figure job to a 5-figure job like that. Mm-hmm. And they said yes. And so that for me, I'm like, oh crap. Okay.
Yeah.
But it's from that land of not knowing.
Yeah.
Right. Another example is I got hired to do a photo shoot for an online publication. They were doing like a giveaway and they were doing a big video shoot with this artist, but I got hired to do like the BTS photos of the shoot and then do a few like kind of candid portraits with the artist during the time. And so I had the rate that I dealt with them. It wasn't work for hire. It was just, a standard shoot rate. And then about 4 months later, I get an email from the artist manager. Hey, we're going to use this photo and like this promo for this TV thing that this artist is doing. Can you just sign this real quick for us? And in the back of my mind, I was like, hold up. I did this shoot for this other company. You don't get to do this with that. And so like I sat back for a second and like, I'm not normal. Again, this is where sometimes it gets uncomfortable, right? Like you are hesitant to push. And so
why are you hesitant to push?
I think we're all resistive to like conflict.
Okay, good.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like it having to go back and forth is uncomfortable for most people.
We want to live in our art. We want to live in the place that we're happy.
And so I reply back like, very eloquently, like, hey, this this shoot was done for this one purpose only. You guys don't have the usage rights for this. Like, if you want to use this photo for this, like, we'll have to come up with a licensing agreement, but happy to work through something if that's something that you'd be interested in.
Very well said.
And he replies back immediately, what's the rate? And so, like, I go,
what's it being used for?
Right. Well, and so that was my next question. And so I then, not knowing, right? Because again, this is that whole, I'm the kid, not knowing what the going rate for a one image license. So I make a couple phone calls to a couple friends.
Yep.
And I'm like, hey, this is the scenario. And so we kind of figure out kind of what the going rate for that would be. I email him back and I'm like, hey, this will be the rate. This will be the restrictions. Like, is that something that you want to like go forward with? And I'll drop a contract. And he's like, yep, sounds great. So I draw up the contract, you know, here's what you can do, here's what you can't do, all that, send it off. 24 hours later, they pay it.
Yeah.
And had I not pushed on that, right, a lot of people would just been like, oh, sure, whatever, sign
I already
it.
made mine. I didn't know I could make more.
You know what I mean? And so that's like a small example of getting what you're owed as the creator for that.
Absolutely.
And for you, you're like, duh, of course you would do that. But most people, especially that kind of come up through the new way of doing stuff, it's like you're not top of your mind like thinking that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, I do.
And so it's, you know,
it's leaving a lot of people. The more people do that though, from the ground level, it rises. It affects even me with budgets and getting things approved, because they'll say, oh, we can go get this for X amount of money. And my response always is, well, then you need to go do that. You know, quality will never go outdated. And I believe that sticking to your guns, knowing that you are producing quality work that warrants demand, then you do have to be willing to get into the weeds of business, finance, contracts, legal, you know. And a lot of times with small businesses, like I have business managers, you know, and you need to be making a certain amount of money to even kind of justify a business manager. You know, when you're doing $80,000-$100,000 videos,
there's so
many line items and factors. Thank God I've got Troy, but like you can't be pushed around in a sense. You know, you have to stick to your guns, because if you don't, one simple line going wrong or not being there can cost you thousands.
Right. The margins are so thin.
Exactly.
And I don't think people don't understand that at all. You know what I mean? They don't understand that, like, just because there's $100,000 video, you're not walking away with $100,000.
I'm not walking away with $100K.
You know what I mean? And so it's like the other part of that too that I think is so important, especially in the touring side of it, that I would encourage anyone to do if they're not, before they even go out on a bus the first time, is make sure you've got insurance. Of course. It's the dumbest thing. It's the dumbest thing. But I can promise you, even if you're on a straight salary with an artist, their tour insurance is not going to cover your camera if you drop it and break it. Just like it's not going to cover that, you know, guitar player's guitar. And so it's like, you've got to protect yourself.
Yeah, you're sitting on a $12,000
every way possible. And it's like, you know, what happens if you get on a small regional flight that you didn't realize, and now they're not going to let you, your Pelican case, you know, even though it's supposed to squeeze in, didn't squeeze in, and they're like, hey, we're going to throw it under the plane now and take all your batteries out.
I love you.
Like, I've gotten so many arguments with flight attendants over that sort of stuff. And
I just did it. They were like, hey, you need to put this in the bag, under the plane. I said, there's $30,000 worth of cameras. Do you want that liability? And they said, we'll figure out a spot. But when I was with EM Tongi in wherever we were, South Pacific, Virgin or whoever was so strict on their weight and their batteries and all that stuff. I had my camera bag full of cameras, batteries, cables, card readers in 5 other people's bags.
I believe it.
And so when we got there, I'm like, who's got cables for this? They're like pulling things. I'm like, oh, this is not fun. I mean, I'm trying to rebuild my bag when you land.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's people don't understand that the overhead size in Europe is smaller than here.
Yeah.
So even if you take your Pelican 1510 or whatever that'll squeeze in anything here, it's not going to fit over there. Live that the hard way.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like there's so many like little things that go along the way that you like, you know, you either have to learn or somebody tells you, you know, your power thing you were talking about, like, you know, that's
battery maintenance in Europe.
That's a whole challenge in itself.
Yeah, I can honestly say I treat cameras like they are a tool. And I would suffice to say that every single time I shoot photo at a show, I am this close to breaking my camera, falling, doing something. I am doing, you know, I'm shoving myself in somewhere. I got lenses at different places, you know, and your brain's going and blah, and you're like, oh shit, I left the 7200. I'll be back. You know what I mean? Like it's just like, yeah, your brain is going everywhere. You're creatively zoned in. You're a little bit absent-minded. So yes, insurance is a big thing.
Yeah. I would definitely say that like that there's a whole laundry list of things that you just learn along the way, but you know, having those, you're right. The contracts need insurance. If you start there, you know, have your business set up properly so that you get off the right write-offs, you know, that'll get you kind of a long way.
Well, one of the, as we close up here, I would say the one thing that I would say is remaining to be a constant in these conversations, and it's very much in this with you, is trust between you and the artist you work for is paramount. It's everything. It's not only in the work you create, it's in how you go about your prep, how at ease you can get the work done. And I feel like your relationship with Luke Combs is nothing short of trust.
Yeah, and the thing that I've seen people do, I try my best not to do it, is let that allow you to be lazy.
Hell no. Good for you to say that. I'm so
it's
stoked
so
you said that.
easy for someone to like have that and not go for it just as hard as if they just got
over deliver. Yeah. That man is trusting you. You have that trust. I'm gonna over deliver. Yeah, brother. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Dude, we can go on for hours. I know we can. Thank you so much for coming in here. This has been eye-opening for me, and I know for our guests. So
you'll have to do one of these on the road. Come out to a show.
I would love to
do a live in the trenches.
That would be fun. Thank you again, brother.